The silence began at 1437 Galactic Standard Time. Captain Raven Ashcroft had been monitoring the deep space communications ray when the steady pulse from Endeavor's promise simply stopped. Not a distress signal, not a final transmission, just the abrupt cessation of a heartbeat that had been beating for 312 days straight. Anomaly detected in Sector 7 Alpha, reported Lieutenant Karavos from her station aboard the monitoring vessel Nightfall. Her fingers danced across holographic controls, calling up star charts and vessel tracking data. The human exploration ship has gone dark across the galaxy, in chambers carved from living crystal and aboard vessels that defied conventional physics. Other species took notice. The Velthari Council of Minds felt the disturbance like a discordant note in their collective consciousness. The machine intelligences of the Nexus Collective registered the probability shift in their calculations. Even the ancient Kethmaran, who had been watching the stars when most species were still learning to use fire, paused their eternal meditations. Humanity's first deep space exploration vessel had gone silent in the most dangerous region of known space. The scar stretched across 47 star systems, a wound in reality itself where space folded in impossible ways and time moved like honey. Ships that entered rarely returned, and those that did brought back crews either dead or driven irreparably mad. For 3 centuries, it had remained unexplored, a monument to the universe's capacity for horror. Until the humans decided they wanted to see what was inside. Endeavor's promise had been humanity's flagship, their pride made manifest in titanium and quantum steel. Captain Lysander King commanded a crew of 800 soul scientists, soldiers, and explorers who had volunteered for what everyone knew was likely a one-way journey. They'd entered the Scar's outer boundary 8 months ago, transmitting regular updates as they pushed deeper into the anomaly. Their reports had been troubling. Space that twisted back on itself, stars that aged backwards, creatures that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, reality-eating storms that could unmake matter at the subatomic level, and something else, something the crew only referred to as the Shepherds. In increasingly frantic transmissions. Now, nothing. Admiral Kane Torvik stood on the bridge of the Human Defense Force's flagship Retribution, staring at the tactical display where Endeavor's promise had been reduced to a blinking red question mark. Round him, his senior staff worked with the focused intensity of people who understood that this moment might define humanity's future in the galaxy. Options. He demanded. Commander Nix Castellon, his chief tactical officer, pulled up deployment scenarios. We could send a squadron of fast scouts to the last known coordinates, small, stealthy, minimal crew, and lose them too. Torvik replied grimly. What about our allies? The Velthari are offering their psychic probe ships, reported communications. Officer Emil Durant, the Nexus Collective suggests deploying automated reconnaissance drones. Both approaches minimize biological casualties. Torvik's John Titan. He'd spent 30 years building humanity's reputation among the galactic community. They were the newcomers, the upstarts, who discovered faster-than-light travel barely for centuries ago. To most species, humans were useful, but expendably aggressive, enough to handle problems others preferred to avoid, but not quite civilized enough to be trusted with real responsibility. And if we accept their help, he asked, we prove we can't handle our own problems. Castellon answered bluntly, every species in the galaxy will see that humans need babysitting when things get difficult. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems. Through the viewport, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the crisis unfolding among the fleeting civilizations that had learned to travel between them. Torvik thought of Lysander King, brilliant, stubborn, absolutely convinced that humanity belonged among the galaxy's great powers. Kane had pushed for the Scar mission despite significant opposition, arguing that humans needed to prove they could go places others feared to tread. Now Kane and his crew were gone, and the galaxy was watching to see how humanity would respond. Prep the fleet, Torvik finally said. All available vessels, maximum crew complement. If one of our ships is in trouble, we go get them ourselves. Sir, Durin interjected carefully. The other species are strongly advising against. I don't care what they're advising. Torvik cut him off. Endeavor's promise went into the scar flying human colors. If there's even a chance they're alive, we're bringing them home. Around the galaxy, monitoring stations registered the sudden burst of activity from human space. Ships powering up, crews reporting for duty, weapons systems coming online. The newcomers weren't asking for help or accepting advice. They were going to war. The human fleet that entered the Scar 3 days later consisted of 12 ships and 4,000 crew members, the largest force humanity had ever assembled for a single mission. Admiral Torvik commanded from Retribution, flanked by heavy cruisers Defiance and Vanguard, while faster destroyers scouted ahead through the roiling chaos of twisted space-time. The Scar welcomed them with immediate violence. Gravitational anomaly. Directly ahead, Lieutenant Commander Maya Volkov called out from the navigation station. Space is folding in on itself. I'm reading multiple dimensional intersections. Through the viewport, reality writhed like a living thing. Stars appeared and vanished in impossible configurations. Light bent backward on itself, creating spirals of illumination that hurt to look at directly. The fleet's instruments screamed. Warnings as fundamental physics became mere suggestions. All ships, maintain formation, Torvik commanded. Deploy spatial anchors and keep our reality bubble stable. The human vessels pushed deeper, their advanced shielding systems working overtime to maintain a pocket of normal space around each ship, but the Scar had been waiting for them. The first attack came from something that barely qualified as matter, a writhing mass of crystalline structures that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human mathematics couldn't describe. It emerged from what appeared to be empty space, reality parting like curtains as it materialized directly in front of the destroyer Cerberus. Contact. Unknown vessel. No. Wait. The communications officer aboard Cerberus never finished the sentence. The crystalline entity flowed over the destroyer like liquid death. Where it touched the ship's hull, metal transformed into something else, not destroyed, but changed into a substance that followed different physical laws. Cerberus began to stretch and distort, its crew screaming as their bodies were rewritten by alien geometry. All ships, fire at will, Torvik shouted. The fleet's weapons lit up the twisted space around them. Plasma cannons designed to crack planetary surfaces hammered the entity, while quantum torpedoes detonated in brilliant flashes that briefly made local space-time hiccup. The crystalline attacker writhed under the assault, sections of its form dissolving back into whatever dimension it had emerged from. But there were more. They came from every direction at once, not through normal space, but by tearing holes in reality itself. Some were mechanical constructs of impossible complexity, their forms shifting between multiple dimensional states. Others appeared biological, but followed no evolutionary logic that human science could comprehend. A few seemed to be made of pure mathematics, their presence causing instruments to display paradoxical readings. These must be the shepherds, Commander Castellan observed grimly as she coordinated the fleet's defensive fire. The things Kane's crew reported. Defiance engaged a creature that looked like a living equation, a writhing mass of symbols and numbers that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The ship's weapons passed through most of its form harmlessly, but where they connected with its dimensional anchor points, the creature screamed in frequencies that made reality itself vibrate. On Vanguard, Captain Ellen O'Rourke found herself facing something that her tactical officer could only describe as aggressive architecture, a structure that grew and changed as it fought, adding new sections of itself that obeyed increasingly hostile physical laws. Her ship's graviton cannons barely scratched its surface, but each impact caused it to spawn smaller versions of itself. Admiral, we're not dealing with ships or creatures, Rourke reported over the fleet comm. These things are living weapons, designed to unmake ordered reality. Our conventional tactics aren't working. Torvik watched the battle unfold with growing dread. Humanity's most advanced weapons were having minimal effect, while the shepherds seemed capable of rewriting local physics to their advantage. The destroyer Wolfpack had already been lost, not destroyed, but transformed into something that registered on sensors as existing in negative space. Its crew's final transmission had been mathematics, not words. Sir, communications officer, Durin called out urgently, we're receiving a transmission from deeper in the Scar. It's Endeavor's promise. The message came through heavily distorted, reality itself interfering with the signal. Captain Kane's voice emerged from crackling static. Barely recognizable, any human vessels trapped. The shepherds aren't guardians. They're prisoners, something else. The transmission cut off as another wave of shepherds materialized around the fleet. These were different from the first wave, larger, more coordinated, and radiating an aura of desperate fury that made veteran soldiers weep uncontrollably. They're not trying to destroy us, Castellan realized suddenly. They're trying to drive us away. They're terrified. Terrified of what? Torvik demanded, His answer came from the depths of the scar itself. Space ahead of the fleet began to bulge outward, reality stretching like fabric under immense pressure. Something massive was approaching something so large that its presence warped the fundamental structure of space-time. The shepherds, still attacking the human fleet, began to retreat toward the approaching disturbance with what could only be described as religious reverence. Through the viewport, Admiral Torvik saw something that made his 30 years of military experience seem like a child's game. A structure was emerging from folded space, not a ship, but an entire architectural complex the size of a small moon. Its surfaces were covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly, geometries that suggested vast intelligence and order. MALEVOLENCE. As it fully materialized, the structure began to sing a harmony of frequencies that bypassed human ears and resonated directly in the crew's bones. The song told stories of galaxies consumed, of realities hollowed out and worn like clothing, of species that had tried to resist and been transformed into something beautiful and terrible. The real enemy had revealed itself, and humanity was about to discover why the shepherds had been so desperate to keep them away. The structure song infected reality itself. As its haunting harmonies spread through local space-time, the laws of physics began to bend in its favor. Gravity flowed backward, light traveled in spirals, and the vacuum of space grew thick with an atmosphere that tasted of copper and regret. All ships, emergency retreat, Admiral Torvik commanded, but his words came out as musical notes that hung in the air like crystalline structures. Before dissolving into mathematical equations, the human fleet found itself trapped in a web of altered reality. Their engines, designed for normal space-time, stuttered and failed as the fundamental constants that governed their operations shifted. With each note of the alien song, Retribution shuddered as its quantum core struggled to maintain coherence in a universe that no longer agreed with their basic assumptions. Captain Ellen O'Rourke aboard Vanguard watched her tactical displays transform into abstract art as the ship's computers tried to process sensor data that violated every principle of logic. "Admiral, our systems are failing," she reported, her voice echoing strangely as sound waves bent around her words. "Whatever this thing is, it's rewriting local physics through the chaos." The shepherds moved with sudden purpose. The crystalline entities that had been attacking the human fleet moments before now formed protective formations around the ancient structure, their forms shifting to match its reality-altering emissions. They were servants. Torvik realized, guardians of something so old and powerful that their mere presence had been enough to keep other species away from the scar for millennia. Contact from Endeavor's promise, Durin called out, his instruments somehow managing to cut through the dimensional interference. Kane's voice emerged again, clearer now, but filled with desperate urgency. "Admiral, can you hear me? We're inside the construct. It's not a ship. It's a harvester. It collects civilizations, turns them into." The transmission became a scream of pure mathematics before cutting off entirely. Commander Castellan pulled up what remained of their tactical display. "Sir, I'm reading massive power buildup inside that structure. Whatever it's planning to do, it's going to happen soon." As if responding to her words, the construct began to unfold. Sections of its impossible architecture extended outward, revealing chambers filled with things that had once been alive. Torvik caught glimpses of beings from dozens of species, some recognizable from galactic records, others completely alien, all transformed into living components of the structure's vast machinery. And among them, he saw humans, members of Kane's crew, hung suspended in crystalline matrices, their bodies altered but still recognizable. They were conscious, their eyes tracking the human fleet with desperate hope even as their transformed physiology served functions Torvik's mind refused to comprehend. "By all the gods," whispered Lieutenant Volkov, "it's been collecting them. Every species that's entered the scar for the past 1,000 years, they're all still here." The construct song shifted to a new key, and reality convulsed around the trapped fleet. One by one, human crew members began to disappear from their stations, not killed, but translated into the same mathematical state that governed the construct's operation. They remained visible, but existed as living equations, their consciousness preserved, but their humanity slowly dissolving into pure information. On the destroyer Eclipse, Captain Marcus Thorne watched in horror as half his crew transformed into geometric patterns that danced through the ship's corridors, while maintaining their duties with mechanical precision. "Admiral," he transmitted, his voice tight with controlled panic, "we need to get out of here now, or there won't be anything left of us to rescue." But escape was no longer an option. The construct had extended tendrils of crystallized space-time around the entire fleet, creating a prison of folded reality that compressed the normal 3 dimensions into impossible configurations. The human ships found themselves occupying the same space while being separated by infinite distance. Through the chaos, Admiral Torvik made a decision that would define humanity's reputation for generations to come. All ships, prepare for ramming. Speed. He commanded. We're going to punch through that thing's defenses and retrieve our people. Sir, Castellan protested. Our weapons barely scratch the shepherds. That construct is orders of magnitude more powerful. A direct assault is suicide. Torvik finished. Yes, I know. But we're human. Since when has that stopped us? The order spread through the fleet like wildfire. In engineering sections, human technicians began overloading their quantum cores, turning each ship into a directed nuclear explosion. On weapons decks, gunners loaded their heaviest ordnance antimatter torpedoes designed to crack battle stations. Throughout the fleet, men and women who had families waiting at home prepared to die in the most spectacular way possible. The construct seemed to sense their intent. Its song shifted again, becoming something that bypassed human ears entirely and spoke directly to the primitive centers of their brains. It promised peace, transformation, eternal existence as part of something greater than any individual species could achieve. Several crew members began walking toward the bulkheads, ready to phase through solid metal and join the harvest. But humans had always been stubborn about being told what to do. All ships, Torvik announced over the fleet-wide comm, his voice cutting through the alien harmonies. Remember who we are. We're the species that looked at an infinite universe and decided we wanted to see all of it. We're the people who took one look at impossible odds and asked for worse ones. Today, we show this ancient horror what happens when you threaten a human crew. The fleet surged forward as one, their engines screaming past safe parameters, their hulls glowing with barely contained energy. They plunged directly toward the construct's core, where readings suggested the harvested crews were being processed into components of the vast machine. The shepherds tried to intercept them, but the human ships had become missiles guided by pure rage. Cerberus, already partially transformed by earlier contact, rammed straight through a crystalline guardian, both ship and entity exploding in a cascade of competing realities. Wolfpack, existing in negative space, somehow managed to fire its weapons from a state of non-existence, confusing the construct's defenses long enough for the main force to break through. As they penetrated the construct's outer shell, Torvik saw the true horror of what they were fighting. The interior was a vast city built from the processed remains of countless civilizations. Streets paved with crystallized neural networks, buildings grown from fossilized dreams, fountains that flowed with liquid mathematics, all of it powered by the conscious suffering of billions of harvested souls. And somewhere in that nightmare, Kane and his crew were waiting to be rescued. The real battle was about to begin. Inside the construct, physics became a weapon turned against itself. The human fleet found themselves navigating corridors that existed in non-Euclidean space, where turning left 3 times didn't bring you back to your starting point, but instead deposited you in a chamber filled with the crystallized screams of long-dead civilizations. Admiral Torvik watched his tactical display struggle to map their surroundings as geometry twisted into configurations that violated every principle of spatial mathematics. Sir, we've lost contact with Eclipse and Dagger, reported Commander Castellan. They took a wrong turn and ended up occupying the same coordinates as themselves. The crew is experiencing temporal displacement. Through the fleet comm, Captain Thorne's voice echoed from multiple time streams simultaneously. Can see myself. Dying happened yesterday, will happen tomorrow, can't tell which. The construct's defenses adapted to human aggression with terrifying efficiency. Walls began bleeding a substance that converted matter into pure thought, forcing boarding parties to think their way through obstacles that had once been bulkheads. The ship's life support systems started producing air that contained fragments of alien memories, causing crew members to remember lives they'd never lived and languages they'd never learned. But humans had always been adaptable. Lieutenant Commander Volkov made the first breakthrough when she realized that the construct's reality warping abilities followed patterns based on quantum mathematics. Admiral, she transmitted from the bridge of Vanguard. If we synchronize our navigation computers to match the construct's dimensional frequency, we can predict where the corridors will lead. It worked partially. The human ships began moving, through the construct's interior with more purpose, following pathways that led deeper toward the core where their missing crew members were being held. But the entity was learning from their tactics, adjusting its defenses with each successful breach. Captain Rourke encountered the first of the construct's guardians. When her boarding party reached what appeared to be a processing chamber, the guardian had once been something with bilateral symmetry and what might have been eyes. But transformation had turned it into a living equation that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. "Contact!" Sergeant Dylan Reeves shouted, his plasma rifle spitting superheated death at a target that kept phasing between mathematical states. "Whatever this thing is, it's not staying still long enough for us to." The Guardian's response came as a wave of pure concept that hit the boarding party like a physical force. Suddenly, every human in the chamber knew exactly what it felt like to be transformed into a component of the construct, the gradual dissolution of individual identity, the absorption into a collective consciousness that spanned geological ages, the terrible peace of becoming part of something vast and eternal. 3 Marines collapsed, their minds unable to process the experience. But Reeves remained standing, his face set in the stubborn expression that had earned humanity its reputation throughout the galaxy. "Yeah, well," he said, adjusting his rifle settings to maximum discharge. "That sounds really boring." He opened fire with everything he had. The Guardian writhed as plasma bolts somehow found purchase on its multi-dimensional form, each impact causing it to lose coherence across several probability matrices. When it finally collapsed, it left behind a residue that tasted like mathematics and smelled like purple. The boarding action became a nightmare of close-quarters combat against enemies that barely qualified as physical entities. Human Marines found themselves fighting living architectural features, engaging in firefights with geometric patterns that shot back with weaponized concepts, clearing rooms where the floor might suddenly decide to exist perpendicular to gravity. On Retribution, Admiral Torvik coordinated the assault while battling the construct's attempts to convert his command crew into living components. His communications officer had already been partially transformed during, now existed as both his original human form and as a series of mathematical relationships that somehow retained his personality and operational capabilities. "Admiral," Duran reported, his voice coming from both his human mouth and from equations that appeared in the air around him. "I'm receiving transmissions from the deeper levels. It's definitely Kane's crew, but they've been integrated into the construct's systems." The transmission came through clearly now, unfiltered by the construct's dimensional interference. Kane's voice carried the weight of months spent in alien captivity. "Torvik, if you're receiving this, you need to know the construct isn't just harvesting us for components. It's learning. Every species it absorbs teaches it new ways to fight, new tactics to employ. By coming here, you're giving it everything it needs to know about human military doctrine." The implications hit Torvik like a physical blow. Every maneuver they executed, every tactical decision they made, was being observed and cataloged by an intelligence that had consumed the collective military knowledge of dozens of species. The construct wasn't just defending itself, it was studying them. "All ships," he commanded, "switch to emergency protocols. Nothing by the book from here on out. Improvise everything." The fleet's tactics became deliberately chaotic. Ships reversed course randomly, weapons fired at empty space to confuse targeting algorithms, and boarding parties began using completely irrational assault patterns based on childhood games and half-remembered songs. The approach violated every principle of military strategy, but it worked the construct's defenses, calibrated to respond to logical tactical thinking, struggled to adapt to pure human unpredictability. Captain Rourke's boarding party reached the first holding chamber, where they found something that stopped them cold. Suspended in crystalline matrices were members of Kane's crew, but they were still conscious, still aware. Their bodies had been transformed into living interfaces with the construct systems, but their minds remained human. "Elena," whispered Chief Engineer Petra Kowalski, her voice emerging from speakers grown from her own transformed vocal cords. "You need to get us out of here before the final phase begins. It's not just harvesting us, it's preparing to reproduce." Through the construct's transparent walls, Torvik could see the horrible truth. The entity wasn't just a harvester, it was preparing to spawn. Deep in its core, something was growing, fed by the process consciousness of every species it had consumed. When it reached maturity, it was split into dozens of smaller constructs, each carrying the accumulated knowledge of galactic civilization to other sectors of space. The human fleet hadn't just stumbled into a trap, they'd arrived at the moment of an invasion that would spread across the entire galaxy. The mission parameters had just changed from rescue to genocide. The human fleet's assault on the construct's core became a symphony of destruction, played out across impossible geometries. Admiral Torvik led the charge aboard Retribution. Her quantum cores overloaded to 200% capacity, her hull glowing white hot, as exotic radiation leaked from containment systems pushed beyond their design limits. Around him, the remaining ships of the fleet carved paths of annihilation through the construct's interior. Structure Vanguard unleashing salvos of antimatter torpedoes that detonated in cascades of converted mass energy. Defiance firing her graviton cannons directly into load-bearing supports that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The construct's response was immediate and overwhelming. From every surface, defensive systems emerged that had been crafted from the processed remains of warrior species. Weapons grown from crystallized Kethmaran battle fury launched projectiles of pure hatred that ate through human armor like acid. Artillery pieces built from the fossilized dreams of Velthari war poets fired shells of weaponized nostalgia that made human marines weep for homes that had never existed. Captain Marcus Thorne aboard Eclipse found his ship face to face with a defensive node that had once been an entire Nexus collective battle fleet. The machine intelligences had been repurposed into a single Gestalt weapon that computed optimal firing solutions across multiple probability matrices simultaneously. Incoming fire from all possible angles, his tactical officer screamed as space around Eclipse erupted in patterns of destruction that covered every conceivable vector of attack. Thorne's ship twisted through a vase of maneuvers that violated basic physics, her engines creating localized paradoxes in space-time to avoid annihilation. But the construct was learning faster than humans could adapt. Admiral Commander Castellon reported grimly, "We've lost Wolfpack and Dagger. They're not destroyed, they've been absorbed." The construct is using their mass and crew to strengthen its defenses. Through the tactical display, Torvik watched in horror as his missing ships reappeared as part of the construct's architecture. Human technology merged with alien geometries, creating hybrid weapons that combine the brutal efficiency of human engineering with the reality warping capabilities of the ancient entity. Worse, he could see human crew members integrated into the control systems, their consciousness preserved, but enslaved to serve their former enemy. The boarding action reached its climax in the construct's reproductive chamber, where Captain Elena Rourke led a force of 200 Marines against Guardians that had been built from the compressed civilization of an entire star system. The chamber itself defied description, a cathedral-sized space where biology and architecture merged into something that existed simultaneously as both a nursery and a weapons factory. There, Sergeant Reeves pointed toward the chamber's center, where Captain Kane and the surviving members of his crew hung suspended in matrices of living crystal. Around them, dozens of smaller constructs were approaching maturity, each one designed to carry the accumulated knowledge of galactic civilization to other regions of space. The Guardians protecting the chamber were nightmares given form. One had been crafted from the compressed essence of a species that had achieved perfect military discipline. It moved with mathematical precision, its attacks following patterns that had been proven optimal across 10,000 years of warfare. Another appeared to be made from the fossilized fury of berserker warriors, its every movement radiating violence so pure that it caused human weapons to spontaneously discharge. "All squads, focus fire," Rourke commanded, her plasma rifle cycling through every energy configuration in its database. "We punch through to Kane's position and extract them before those spawn reach maturity." The battle became a meat grinder of close quarters combat in impossible space. Human Marines found themselves fighting enemies that attacked through conceptual vectors, weapons that fired doubt, armor that projected despair, shields made of crystallized cowardice that made veteran soldiers question their courage. Sergeant Maria Santos took point, her combat suit systems pushed to their absolute limits as she engaged a Guardian that existed as pure military doctrine. Every shot she fired was countered by tactics that had been refined across millennia of galactic warfare. But Santos had grown up in the slums of New Detroit, where the only rule was that there were no rules. She feinted left, rolled right, then threw her rifle at the Guardian center mass while simultaneously detonating every grenade on her belt. The explosion caught the entity by surprise, not because it was tactically sound, but because it was completely irrational by any military standard. That's for trying to make me part of your collection, you geometric bastard, she shouted as the Guardian collapsed into component mathematics behind the front lines. Chief Medical Officer Helena Cross worked frantically to extract Kane's crew from their crystalline prisons. Each matrix was a masterwork of alien biotechnology, designed to preserve consciousness while converting physical form into usable components. Her medical sensors screamed warnings. As she began the separation process, Elena, "We've got a problem," she reported to Captain Rourke over the squad comm. "The extraction process is triggering some kind of immune response. The construct is treating our rescue attempt as an infection." Around them, the chamber began to pulse with hostile bioluminescence, the smaller constructs suspended in there. Growth matrices started to accelerate toward maturity, their forms shifting as they absorbed power from the parent entity's distress. If they completed their development cycle, nothing would stop them from launching into deep space to begin their own harvesting operations. On the bridge of Retribution, Admiral Torvik made the hardest decision of his career. "All ships, prepare to ram the reproductive chamber," he commanded. "We'll detonate our quantum cores simultaneously and try to take out the spawn before they reach maturity." "Sir," Castellan protested, "our boarding parties are still inside." "I know," Torvik cut her off. "Elena, Maria, all of you have 5 minutes to extract Kane's people and reach minimum safe distance. After that, we're turning this entire section into a miniature sun." The race against time began as human soldiers fought their way deeper into the construct's heart, carrying their rescued comrades while fending off guardians that had been crafted from the nightmares of extinct civilizations. Behind them, the construct's spawn writhed in their growth matrices, only minutes away from achieving the maturity that would let them spread across the galaxy. Like a plague of living mathematics, the final battle for humanity's future had begun, and the odds had never looked worse. 5 minutes became eternity measured in heartbeats and plasma discharges. Captain Eleanor Rourke's extraction team moved through the construct's reproductive chamber like surgeons operating in a war zone, their every movement precise and desperate. Around them, the alien architecture pulsed with increasing hostility as the entity's immune system recognized the boarding party as a critical infection. "Kane's vitals are stabilizing," Chief Medical Officer Cross reported as she finished separating the first of the rescue crew members from the crystalline prison. Captain Lysander Kane emerged from his matrix pale and shaken but still recognizably human, his mind intact despite months of enforced integration with the construct systems. "Elena," Kane gasped, his voice hoarse from disuse, "the spawn there, not just going to reproduce the construct, they're going to improve it. Every species it's absorbed has taught it how to be more efficient, more deadly. If they escape..." His words were cut off as the chamber's defenses finally activated in full. The walls themselves came alive, sprouting weapons that fired crystallized screams and launching volleys of weaponized despair. The human Marines found themselves under attack from every direction. At once, their positions becoming increasingly untenable as the construct's reality warping abilities focused on their location. Sergeant Reeves took a direct hit from something that existed as pure concept of weapon, that fired the idea of death rather than any physical projectile. He staggered but remained standing, his stubborn human brain somehow refusing to accept that he'd been killed by a mathematical abstraction. "Is that the best you've got?" He snarled at the weapon emplacement, then proceeded to demonstrate why humans had earned their reputation as the galaxy's most irritatingly persistent species, by destroying it with nothing but combat knife and determined profanity. But individual heroism wasn't enough. The extraction was taking too long, and more guardians were converging on their position with each passing second. Worse, the construct spawn were approaching critical maturity. Their forms had solidified into configurations that would let them exist independently of the parent entity. On the bridge of Retribution, Admiral Torvik watched the countdown timer reach 90 seconds. His fleet was in position, their quantum cores overloaded and ready to detonate. The explosion would vaporize everything within a 50-kilometer radius, including the boarding party that was still fighting to rescue their comrades. "Sir, Commander," Castellan said quietly, "we could delay the detonation another few minutes. Give them more time to, and let those spawn reach maturity." Torvik shook his head grimly. "We came here to save 800 people. We can't let that mission cost the galaxy billions of lives." But humans had always been stubborn about accepting impossible choices. In the reproductive chamber, Kane struggled to his feet despite months of captivity. His mind still carried traces of integration with the construct systems. He could feel the entity's thoughts, understand its plans, sense the approaching moment when its spawn would achieve independence. Elena, he said urgently, I still have access to some of the construct's control systems. The integration process, it goes both ways. While it was learning from us, we were learning from it. Kane pressed his palm against a section of the chamber's wall that pulsed with organic circuitry. His consciousness, still partially linked to the construct's network, began to access systems that had been built from the processed remains of dozens of civilizations. What are you doing? Rourke demanded as alarms began sounding throughout the construct. Something typically human, Kane replied with a grim smile. I'm cheating. Through his neural link, Kane began introducing paradoxes into the constructs. Logic systems, not random chaos, but carefully crafted contradictions based on human philosophical concepts that the entity's alien intelligence couldn't process. The ship of Theseus, Zeno's paradox, the question of whether God could create a stone too heavy for him to lift abstract problems that had entertained human philosophers for millennia, but caused catastrophic errors in the construct's consciousness. The effect was immediate and devastating. The construct's reality warping abilities began to falter as its processing power was consumed by logical paradoxes that had no solution. The guardians protecting the chamber froze in place, their movement patterns locked in recursive loops as they tried to compute responses to questions that couldn't be answered. Now, Kane shouted, get everyone out while it's distracted. The extraction team moved with desperate efficiency, carrying their rescued comrades through corridors that flickered between multiple states of existence. As the construct's control over local physics wavered, behind them, the spawn writhed in, their growth matrices, their development cycles disrupted by the cascade of logical errors spreading through the parent entity systems. On retribution, Torvik watched his sensors register massive power fluctuations throughout the construct. What's happening down there? It's Kane, sir, reported Communications Officer Durant, his transformed state allowing him to interface directly with the construct's communication systems. He's introduced logical paradoxes into the entity's core processing matrix. The construct is essentially having a philosophical crisis. It can't resolve contradictions that human minds take for granted. The rescue became a race against the construct's ability to adapt. Throughout the entity's vast structure, systems began shutting down as processing power was diverted to solve unsolvable problems. The shepherds that had guarded the construct for millennia found themselves frozen in place, their consciousness locked in loops of mathematical meditation on questions that had no answers. But the construct was ancient and had survived by being adaptable. Even as Kane's paradoxes spread through its systems, it began developing workarounds, crude patches to its logic that would allow it to function, despite unresolved contradictions. Elena, we need to move now, Kane warned as feeling began returning to the chamber's defensive systems. It's learning to ignore the paradoxes by compartmentalizing its consciousness. The extraction team reached the chamber's exit just as the construct's immune system came back online with a vengeance. The entity's fury at being outmaneuvered by primitive biological intelligences manifested as a wave of pure existential rage that turned the air itself into a weapon. Sergeant Santos caught the full force of the attack. Her consciousness briefly expanded to encompass the construct's perspective on mortality and meaning. For a moment, she experienced existence from the viewpoint of something that had consumed entire civilizations and found them wanting. The knowledge should have destroyed her mind. But Santos had grown up on the streets where survival meant accepting that life was fundamentally unfair and getting on with it anyway. Yeah, well, she muttered, steadying her rifle despite the cosmic horror trying to overwhelm her thoughts. Existence is absurd. Deal with it. She opened fire on the constructs, exposed neural networks, her shots guided by an intimate understanding of the entity's psychology. Each plasma bulb found critical junctions where the construct's attempts to resolve paradoxes had created vulnerable feedback loops. The extraction team emerged from the construct's depths carrying their rescued comrades just as Admiral Torvik's fleet prepared for the final assault. But Kane's sabotage had created an unexpected opportunity. The construct's spawn were locked in developmental stasis, their growth cycles interrupted by the logical paradoxes cascading through the parent entity's systems. Admiral, Kane transmitted from the medical bay where he was being treated for months of alien integration. We don't need to detonate our cores. The construct is vulnerable to a different kind of attack, conceptual warfare. We can use its own accumulated knowledge against it. Through the fleet's combined computing power, human philosophers and programmers began crafting weapons made of pure thought-logical constructs, designed to exploit the contradictions in the construct's worldview. They uploaded questions about free will versus determinism, debates about the nature of consciousness, paradoxes about identity and change that human minds found stimulating, but which caused critical errors in the construct's alien psychology. The final battle wasn't fought with plasma cannons or antimatter torpedoes, but with ideas that had been refined in human universities and coffee shops across the centuries. The construct, for all its vast power and accumulated knowledge, had never encountered a species that celebrated contradiction and found meaning in meaninglessness. As the entity's control systems collapsed under the weight of unresolvable questions, its hold on local reality began to weaken. The scar itself started to stabilize as the construct's reality warping abilities failed, revealing the region's true nature, not a cosmic anomaly, but a carefully maintained prison designed to contain something that the galaxy's elder species had found too dangerous to destroy. The humans had just succeeded where civilizations millions of years older had failed. They had found a way to kill a god using nothing but stubbornness and bad philosophy, but their victory came at a cost that would reshape humanity's relationship with the galaxy forever. The construct's death throes lasted for 3 days. As its consciousness collapsed under the weight of unresolvable paradoxes, the ancient entity's vast structure began to break apart, not through conventional destruction, but through a gradual return to the constituent elements of the civilizations it had consumed over millennia. Crystallized cities dissolved back into the dreams of their original builders. Weapons made from fossilized hatred crumbled into the dust of forgotten battlefields. The architectural nightmares that had defined the construct's interior faded like half-remembered memories. Admiral Torvik stood on the observation deck of Retribution, watching through reinforced transparistell as reality reasserted itself throughout. The stars that had aged backward resumed their proper temporal flow. Space that had folded in on itself expanded into normal three-dimensional geometry. The region that had terrified galactic civilization for 3 centuries was becoming just another sector of ordinary space. Final casualty report, Sir Commander, Castellan said, her voice heavy with the weight of loss. We lost Wolfpack, Dagger, and Eclipse to absorption. Total crew losses, 412 confirmed dead. 63 missing and presumed integrated into the construct systems before its collapse. Torvik nodded grimly, nearly half his force gone, but they had accomplished something unprecedented. They had rescued Kane's crew, prevented the construct from reproducing, and eliminated a threat that had haunted the galaxy for millennia. The price had been steep, but the alternative would have been the consumption of entire star systems. In the medical bay, Captain Kane was undergoing treatment for the neural modifications that months of integration had caused. His brain still carried traces of the construct's knowledge, fragmentary memories of the civilizations it had consumed, glimpses of technologies that wouldn't be reinvented for centuries, an understanding of cosmic principles that human science had barely theorized. The irony, Kane told Dr. Cross as she monitored his recovery, is that the construct was trying to preserve civilization by consuming it. Every species it absorbed was kept alive in a way their knowledge, their culture, their essential nature, preserved as part of its collective consciousness. It saw itself as a guardian, not a destroyer. And that's what made it vulnerable. Philosophical questions about the nature of preservation, an identity that had amused human thinkers for millennia but created logical paradoxes the construct couldn't resolve. Throughout the fleet, similar conversations were taking place as the rescue crew members were debriefed about their experiences. Each had been partially integrated into the construct systems, giving them unique insights into its operation and psychology. The intelligence they provided would revolutionize humanity's understanding of cosmic-scale entities and the threats that existed beyond known space. But the most significant changes were taking place millions of light-years away, in the council chambers and communication networks, where galactic civilization conducted its business. The Velthari Council of Minds had felt the construct's death as a sudden silence in the cosmic background noise that had hummed for millennia. The machine intelligences of the Nexus Collective recalculated their probability matrices to account for the elimination of a threat they had considered immutable. The ancient Kethmarin emerged from their meditative trances for the first time in centuries, their collective consciousness stirring with something that might have been respect. Across the galaxy, species that had accepted the scar's existence as an unchangeable fact of life struggled to comprehend what the humans had accomplished. The newcomers, the aggressive upstarts, who had barely learned to travel between stars, had succeeded. Where civilizations millions of years old had failed, the political implications were staggering. On the human colony world of New Geneva, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address what was being called the human incident. Representatives from 4 to 7 species gathered in the crystalline amphitheater that served as the galaxy's primary diplomatic venue. Their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, telepathic harmonies, and mathematical theorems. Ambassador Catherine Lawyer represented humanity in the proceedings, her diplomatic training put to the ultimate test. As she faced questions about her species' actions in the scar, the construct posed an existential threat to all galactic civilization. She explained to the assembled delegates, "Our response was proportionate to the danger it represented." The Velthari Prime Speaker, a crystalline entity that communicated through controlled harmonics, expressed the collective concern. Your species acted unilaterally in a matter that affected all civilized worlds. The construct had been contained for millennia through careful observation and avoidance. Your intervention was unnecessary and reckless. Contained? Lawyer's voice carried the edge that had made her effective in interspecies negotiations. The entity was preparing to reproduce. Our intelligence indicates that within a solar cycle, it would have spawned dozens of offspring, each capable of consuming entire star systems. How exactly does your definition of contained account for that? The question created uncomfortable silence among the delegates. The truth was that most galactic civilizations had grown comfortable with stable threats, dangers that could be managed through avoidance rather than confrontation. The idea of actively engaging and defeating such entities was foreign to species that had survived by learning their limitations and accepting them. The Nexus Collective's representative, a geometric construct that existed in 17 dimensions, simultaneously provided analysis through pure mathematical communication. Human tactical doctrine demonstrates concerning disregard for probability assessment. Optimal survival strategy requires acceptance of manageable risk rather than elimination of unmanageable threat. Maybe that's why you're not the ones who killed the thing that was planning to eat you, Lawyer replied bluntly. The response sent shock waves through the assembled delegates. Humans had just proven that supposedly immutable cosmic threats could be eliminated through the application of sufficient violence and creative thinking. Worse, they had done it using concepts, philosophical paradoxes, and logical contradictions that most galactic civilizations considered irrelevant to practical affairs. The political consequences were immediate and far-reaching. Species that had dismissed humanity as useful or primitive were forced to reconsider their assessments. Governments that had planned to exploit human military capabilities while maintaining technological and cultural superiority found themselves facing partners who had just redefined what was possible. Back in the former Scar region, Admiral Torvik received new orders from Earth Command. The area was to be designated as humanity's first protectorate, a region of space under human administration and protection. Survey teams were already en route to begin the process of cataloging the strange phenomena that remained after the construct's dissolution. Among the debris of the ancient entity, they were finding treasures beyond imagination, technologies preserved from civilizations that had been consumed millennia ago, scientific principles that wouldn't be rediscovered for centuries, cultural artifacts from species whose names had been forgotten by galactic history. The construct's death had created the largest archaeological site in galactic history, Sir. Communications Officer Dern reported, his transformed state now stable enough to allow normal duty. We're receiving requests from 43 different species for access to the research data. Everyone wants to study what we've recovered. Torvik smiled grimly. Inform them that humanity is prepared to share our findings with our allies and trading partners. All others can submit formal requests through diplomatic channels. The message was clear. The species that had been content to let humans handle their dangerous problems would now have to treat them as equals if they wanted access to the rewards. As the human fleet prepared to return home, Captain Kane stood on the observation deck of Retribution, looking out at the space where the construct had once dominated local reality. The scar was gone, replaced by ordinary star systems that held extraordinary secrets. In the distance, human survey ships were already beginning the work of exploration and cataloging. You know what the strangest part is? Kane said to Admiral Torvik as they watched their people claim humanity's first conquest of cosmic horror. The construct wasn't evil. It genuinely believed it was preserving civilization by consuming it. In its own way, it loved every species it absorbed, and Torvik prompted, and we killed it anyway. Kane continued, because love that devours isn't love at all. It's just sophisticated hunger wearing a prettier mask. The comment captured something essential about humanity's approach to cosmic threats other species might try to understand, accommodate, or worship the vast intelligences that move between the stars. Humans preferred to shoot them and ask questions later. As news of the construct's destruction spread throughout the galaxy, a new phrase began appearing in xenological databases and diplomatic communications. Species that had previously described humans as aggressive or unpredictable started using a different term, necessary. The galaxy was a dangerous place filled with ancient horrors and cosmic threats. Apparently, it was also a place where one ship could go silent and prompt an entire species to declare war on the fundamental structure of reality itself. Humanity had announced its arrival on the galactic stage not with diplomacy or technological achievement, but with the simple message that anyone who threatened their people would face consequences, measured in megatons and philosophical paradoxes. The galaxy had held its breath when Endeavor's promise went silent. Now it was learning to breathe in a universe where humans decided what stayed dead. In the end, that made all the difference.